as we go live from the Lighthouse Project. So tonight's learning is generously sponsored by DJ Acquisitions, Yisachar Zvulun sponsorship for the Refuah Shalema of Menachem Mendel ben Sarabatia and Devorah Fega Bat Rezel. I would also like to make a very personal and special sponsorship and dedicate this class to the birthday of Delphine Murat, Esther Bat Sarah. Okay, so my dear friends out there, please go ahead and like and share. Last week, it will be pretty much been today's standard that by the end of the week we have 400 views, which is not about me. It's about these words I say, which aren't my words. It's the Torah words that I've learned from the Rebbe, blessed memory. So please take a moment, like and share. Also, whoever wants the notes, all you out there who've been wanting it have been placing in the notes on your comments, your email address, and then I do copy paste it into my program so that you can receive the notes and the emails. So feel free to do so, and I will go ahead and reply to your comment done when it's done. Okay, so where are we up to today? We are up to a very special issue. And what is that issue? The gift of gratitude. Now, it is clear, both to scientists and to laymen, very clear, on the effects that gratitude has on our health, on our longevity, and on our success. There has been a WhatsApp video floating around of a woman age 101 and another woman age 104. And they were being asked, what is the secret to longevity? What is the secret to life? They pretty much spelled out gratitude. I've actually read a very in-depth study, research that scientists did, and because they wanted to eliminate all external factors, so they actually went to different races, different countries, different environments, different food type of stuff. Actually, many of the people that they interviewed had horrific events, such as unfortunately burying a child. You know, the Talmud says that while it's natural for a child to bury a parent, it's very unnatural for a parent to bury a child. And amongst them, there were people that went through that experience who were really well past their hundreds. When I say well past the hundreds, I'm talking about it wasn't just like 99, 100, 101, 104. And it's interesting that as I read that, the one common thing they have found amongst these people is the role with the punches of acceptance and gratitude. It seems to be that is a big factor on longevity and on health and on success. So if we all know this, question, why are there just a precious few, hello Mia, why is there just a precious few who are really able to embrace on a consistent basis the attitude, the personality of gratitude? Just simply really have gratitude. Wake up in the morning, and before you have a list of potential horrors, take a real moment of gratitude. Not just to do the lip service of Moda Ani, but to just feel, oh wow, it's another day. Most of us don't wake up that way. There's a reason why so many of us are in medicine and in therapy. It's because we don't wake up that way. Why don't we have gratitude as attitude, as our personality, when we clearly know how devastating not having it is and how powerful having it is? That's the question here. Okay, now you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that the answer is going to base around ego. A lack of gratitude is only driven by ego. If not for ego, gratitude would be a very normal perspective. We have so much to be grateful for. However, that's good self-knowledge. The reason I lack in gratitude is because I struggle with arrogance and ego. Okay, but that self-knowledge doesn't solve the problem. Very important, but insufficient. So we need to just get beyond the self-knowledge of, and the reason why is because we struggle with ego. Let's go a step further. Let's really embrace and understand and be able to, most importantly, come up with the practical solution how to get past whatever we're struggling and simply have gratitude. Okay? That is the modern day issue of today's class. I'm just interrupting. Sitting next to you is Abram Mitzvah. Oh, okay. Okay. Let's go further. So, you know that lately, before I give you a list of Kabbalistic introductions, I share with you a practical introduction. So here's a practical introduction. There is a very interesting argument of opinions between the Zohar and the Code of Jewish Law, based on a verse in this week's Torah portion, which says, "V'achalta v'savata uverachta," and you will eat, and you will be sated, you will be filled, satisfied, and you will bless. From here we learn out the entire foundation of a section called, in Code of Jewish Law, called Birchat HaNe'enin. You have to make a blessing over everything that you have enjoyment from God's world. Now, when it comes to eating, we have a pre-blessing and we have a post-blessing. Before we eat, we make a blessing, depending on what it is, if it comes from the ground, if it comes from the tree, if it doesn't come from any of those. So all these blessings we make. And then there's the after blessing. When it comes to other types of enjoyment, such as fragrance, you only have a pre-blessing, you don't have a post-blessing. But be it as it may, where does it come from, this concept that you cannot have any enjoyment from this world without first having a moment of gratitude to its creator? From this week's Torah portion. You shall eat, you shall be sated, and you shall bless. Now here goes the argument. But before we go into the argument, I need to share with you a very simple concept in the Talmud. Something that is stated clearly in the Torah is a biblical commandment. Something that is not stated clearly in the Torah, but we know it as a commandment, is a rabbinical commandment. Now, sometimes you have that after the sages made their rabbinical commandment, not biblical, rabbinical, they then go ahead and link it to a verse. Well, one second, if it's linked to a verse, then it's biblical, it's not rabbinical. So we're explained that sometimes you link it to a verse as a reference, a general reference. Ismachta ba'alma. Thus you have a rabbinical ordinance, a commandment, rabbinically speaking, but nevertheless we link it to a verse. But one second, no, it's a smachta. The Talmud will tell you, well, this is just an ismachta ba'alma. It's a general reference, so don't say that this is what God commanded us. The sages made their own extrapolations. Now, this is not the place for this. But just in general, the notion of rabbinical commandments may seem problematic. I'm not interested in man-made religion. I only want God-made religion. So just understand that the power of rabbinical ordinances is extremely powerful. The Talmud says, "Chavivim alai divrei soifrim," more precious is to me what they came up with than what I originally told you. The simple reason for that is that all rabbinical ordinances most often is all about creating a buffer zone between the perfect Torah and the imperfect human. Without buffer zones, the imperfect human will transgress the perfect Torah, just by default. Now I'm going to give you the first time you find this when you open up the Talmud. In the very first statement of the Mishnah of the Talmud, there's a question. You have to say the Shema in the morning, you have to say it at night. The Jewish people, we have the night before the morning, right? Shabbat starts Friday night, not Shabbat morning. So if you have the night before the morning, the first law that we talk about is the time constraints of when do you say the Shema Yisrael at night. So there's a three-way argument. Just get to the point. One opinion says it goes until the morning, and the other opinion says it goes until midnight. However, The great sage Rabbi Gamliel, he explains that when the sages say until midnight, they're not arguing with me. They agree that the biblical ordinance tells you that you have all night until sunrise to say the Shema. However, the sages know the imperfect human being. You just came home from work. You just ate a 14.5-course meal. What's the first thing you want to do right now is go to sleep. Oh, well, you know what? I have till sunrise anyway. I'll wake up. And we don't wake up. And the rabbis knew that. The rabbi said, hey, you have until midnight. And they created a buffer zone for the imperfect thinking of the imperfect human being as not to transgress the perfect laws of Torah. Not the place for this. What's important to us right now just is there's a biblical ordinance and there's a rabbinical ordinance. Why am I even talking about that? Because now we're going to dive into the legal argument between the Holy Zohar and the Code of Jewish Law. The Code of Jewish Law says, very simple, read the verse. V'achalta v'savata. It doesn't say, and you will eat and you will bless. It says, and you will eat and you will be sated, you will be satisfied and filled. Then you have to make a blessing. Aha. That means that biblically speaking, you don't have to make a blessing after a snack. Only after a meal that by definition is here to satisfy you. But if you're just picking up on the run a beautiful big gulp and a Pringles, you don't have to make a grace after meal. Because that isn't sated. It doesn't satisfy you. It's a snack. Then the rabbis go ahead and say, 1 second, what defines a meal from a snack? And it comes up with the opinion, bread. Thus, when do you have to say the big grace after meal? Only when you eat a meal, which by definition they define if you eat bread. Now, it's very technical. I'm just being simple for the purpose of this lecture. But these whole questions, and what if you make the bread with juice instead of water, so it's not bread? So now we have a mezonot and not hamotzi. But what happens if you eat so much of this mezonot bread that it pretty much is a meal? Billion questions. Leave it up to the rabbis. They fill their time very wisely. All the answers are there. But just in a general statement, what we learn out from here is that the Talmud's opinion is the only biblical type of blessing you will ever make is the one you make after a full meal where you wash. You know that you're singing Baruch Atah Hashem, right? And it has over there 4 different blessings, right? There's the first 3 blessings, the one about the food, the one about Israel, the one about Jerusalem, Bonei Yerushalayim, Amen. And then later on they added on the 4th one, which has to do with all the Harachamans, which our sages tell us have to do with gratitude for something that happened post-war in Beitar. But today we have 4 blessings that make up the grace after meal. That is the only biblical blessing, according to the Code of Jewish Law, you'll ever make. Every other blessing you'll ever make is rabbinical. Now, you may ask me, if I have to do it anyway, what's the difference? Biblical, rabbinical? So just in general, you should know that one of the major differences is when you have a doubt, did I or didn't I? If it's biblical, you have to go back and do it. If it's rabbinical, you don't have to go back and do it. That's just a technical thing. We're not here for these technical details. I just want you to understand that, what's he talking about? Biblical. We have to do it, Rabbi. Leave me alone. What do I care who made it up? I got to do it, right? I got to do it. So we're not talking about that. But let's get into now. So from the verse of Visavata, you will eat and you will be sated, filled, satisfied. The Talmud learns out the only biblical blessing you have to make is the one after meal. Grace after meals, known as Birkat HaMazon. Comes along the Zohar, and the Holy Zohar in this week's Torah portion quotes this verse, and it starts stating, not a mystical statement, it starts stating a legal statement. Do Pekudah, this mitzvah of this blessing, is the mitzvah to have to bless the Holy One, blessed be He, before everything you eat, over everything you eat, over everything you drink, and over everything desfrutar, everything that you enjoy. So if that be the case, the Zohar clearly holds that the definition of the biblical commandment is that every blessing you make, before you take a good whiff of the psamim by Havdalah, and you have to make a blessing, the Zohar holds that's biblical. You're about to take a quick Snapple on the run, that blessing, according to the Zohar, is biblical. So we have an argument here. The Talmud, the Code of Jewish Law, bottom line states that it's only rabbinical. There's only one blessing, grace after meal, Birkat HaMazon, that's biblical. The Zohar clearly states that everything is biblical. If this to be the case, in 1966, the Rebbe delivers a discourse to understand why. Now, you very clearly see where this lecture is going to go. Because if blessing is all about gratitude, getting into the mystical understanding of why they hold the different opinions of blessings is going to give us the timeless wisdom of Judaism of how and when you have to have gratitude. According to the Talmud, biblically speaking, we can only have gratitude after a meal that satisfies us. According to the Zohar, you can have, biblically speaking, you can embrace gratitude as attitude before and after everything you eat, everything you drink, everything you enjoy. Interesting, right? So you see where this is going when we talk about the modern issue, a solution to a modern day issue, a very painful modern day issue which paralyzes us. We don't have gratitude, we're paralyzed. So a modern day issue that makes a difference in the relationships, in financing, in health, and longevity, taken from the timeless wisdom of Judaism, primarily from a mystical teaching of the Rebbe delivered in 1966. Okay? Now, I want to just go on to the rest of the statement of this Zohar. It gets a little bit more mystical. Oh, I'm sorry. I do want to just state something which is important here. I'm sorry. Oops. The Zohar does have a Talmudic foundation. Why does the Zohar have a Talmudic foundation? If the Talmud states clearly that everything is rabbinical other than grace after meal. So I want to share with you something. The Talmud itself has a question. When the rabbis do an add-on buffer zone, they have to link it to a biblical source. I'm going to give you an example. Okay, another example. Biblically speaking, what does the verse say? You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. I'm talking about a goat, guys. We're not talking about cooking kids here. What are we talking about? Meat, red meat, and milk. In Jewish law, there's a very clear distinction between fowl, F-O-W-L, and animal meat. Thus, biblically speaking, there is no prohibition between mixing a good, delicious schnitzel cheese sandwich. There's no meat in it, there's fowl, there's chicken. Came along the rabbis and they said, in most people's mind, meat includes fowl. Thus, if you're going to allow them to have a chicken sandwich with cheese, they're not going to realize the next thing you know, they're going to have a delicious steak sandwich with cheese. So they went and they said, we're going to add on fowl and milk as well. But if the Torah would have never prohibited anything of meat and milk, they never would have gone further. So thus the question is, no, you're telling me that they hold, biblically speaking, you can only have to make a grace after meals, not snack. And therefore they came along and they said, you know what? We're going to add on to this. You thank God after every snack. That makes sense. But how did you get from the biblical commandment of grace after meals to creating that you have to make a blessing before meals? The Talmud in Brachot has that question. And the Talmud says, a kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer in Latin is fortori. To learn out the stricter from the lesser. If this is mandatory, how much more so that is mandatory? So it says, if after you're satisfied, it's mandatory to thank God, make a blessing, how much more so when you're hungry, before you eat, thank God that you have food to eat. It's a kal v'chomer. That's where it all comes from. Comes along the great Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the composer of the entire Mishnah, and he says, you don't need that. Why do you have to go with a 40-40, which is one of the 13 rules of extrapolating the Torah Kal V'chomer? You have a verse. The verse tells you, and you shall eat, and you shall be satisfied, and you shall bless. What do we see that Rebbe holds? That from that verse, we don't just talk about grace after meals. He, like the Zohar, it actually has to be the other way around, by the way. The Zohar came after Rebbe. But what do we learn out from here? No, I'm not sure about that. Okay, I got to look that up again. But be it as it may, I'm probably wrong about that. Shema wasn't time at the Holy Temple. But the bottom line is that he holds that you have to make a blessing biblically from this verse. So we don't need no Kal V'chomer extrapolations. Okay? That means that the Zohar does have a code of Jewish law opinion to lean on. But there's a problem. What does the verse tell us? If there's a single opinion and there's a many opinion, Yochid V'Rabim, one versus the many, the rule goes according to the many. So therefore they follow the opinion of the many. The only biblical law of blessing you have is the grace after meal. The Zohar, interesting enough, the Zohar, based on a statement that we're going to discuss soon in Talmud Eruvin, that Zohar, that opinion says that every opinion in the Torah is true. Elu ve'elu, these and these, i.e., the words of these and the words of these, divrei lekim chayim, are the words of the living God. Thus the Zohar has no problem, and it's not the only time it does it. It will not follow the many, it will follow the one, because it's saying that these two are the words of the living God. Bottom line, my friends, what's going on here? What's going on here? Why does the Gemara have one opinion and the Code of Jewish Law follows that opinion of the many? Why does the Zohar have another opinion? Well, why not just agree with the Zohar? Always have gratitude. And if you need to put a legging on the exact wording of the verse, then why does the Zohar have to go beyond that? What's going on here with the gratitude? Okay, now with this being said, let's go to a couple of interesting words of the Zohar. After the Zohar finishes this its opinion of the mitzvah, I want to read to you what it says. It starts, I'm not going to read you the whole thing, I'm going to read you just one piece of it. He starts defining the mystical definition of the liturgy, the wording of a bracha. What's the first word you say in every bracha? Baruch. So he says as follows. He goes there and says, Baruch, blessed be. I'm quoting you the words, obviously translated in English. The Zohar was written in Aramaic. This is the secret of the source of all, to empty, over here it means pour out, and to draw forth, and to illuminate all candles. Wow. That's what the word Baruch means. What's the terminology here? Three things, right? You have la'arka, to pour out, la'amshecha, to draw, and linohora, to illuminate. Kol butzinin, all candles. We need to understand this. We really need to understand this in the most practical sense. That's the introduction to the introductions of this class. Now let's get into the mystical introductions. Number one, my friends, the meaning of destined to endure. It's the words we're going to soon see in Ethics of Our Father, Sofo lehiskayem. Number two, what is the prerequisite to gratitude? There's a prerequisite. Without this prerequisite, we are not capable of truly embodying gratitude from the inside out. Oh, we've all been taught by our parents to say thank you, right? They wouldn't release you ask them for something, they would hold on to it. What do you say? We know how to say thank you. Gratitude from the inside out. There's a prerequisite. Third introduction, what are the sparks of Tohu? Fourth introduction, what does it mean to love God with all your might? Not enough to love Him with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And then the final introduction, no, let's cross out the final introduction for today. Let's go further. Now let's let the amazement of Hasidus begin to unfold. What does it mean destined to endure? So I'm going to read to you exactly the teachings of Ethics of Our Father, chapter 5, Mishnah number 17. Any dispute that is for the sake of heaven is destined to endure. One that is not for the sake of heaven is not destined to endure. And then the Mishnah goes on to say, what are we talking about? Which is a dispute that is for the sake of heaven? The disputes between Hillel and Shammai. Which is a dispute that is not for the sake of heaven? The dispute of Korach and all his company. So you know the story of Korach, a cousin of Moses. He stands up and fights against Moses. Why do you have you and your brother? They're the high priest and you're the king. We're all holy. We should all be leaders. We all want the exact communism. But you know what happened in communism, right? We're all equal, but some are a little more equal than others. So this Korach that was asking for equality was saying, and I will be the high priest. That was not about God. And thus we know the end of the story. Korach was swallowed up. Hillel and Shammai arguing all over the Talmud. Arguments. Those disputes were not for self-grandeur. They were for the sake of God. So much so, I want to put this in proper perspective. Today, you have biblical arguments amongst rabbis that is not for the sake of heaven. The very simple proof is that it leads to animosity. This one says that one is ashkegetz, and you can't eat from that one's ashgacha. This one says don't go to that mikveh because if you do go to that mikveh, your children are ben nidah. That's already not for the sake of heaven. Let me tell you what happened amongst Hillel and Shammai. There is a specific case in a divorce where Shammai says that this get is not kosher. Hillel says this get is yes kosher. Let me tell you the outcome of such an argument. So if Hillel's people went and did such a get, and then this woman got remarried, and she had kids, according to Shammai, that this get is not a kosher get. This woman was a married woman. She had a child from another husband. That makes that child illegitimate. You're not allowed to marry an illegitimate child. Can you imagine what today's rabbis would do? It would be a pleasure to start posting, kol koida, warning, do not marry anyone that ever spoke to that community because you never know. The Talmud says you should know that Shammai allowed his students to marry into the families of the students of Hillel. Why? Because when an argument is for the sake of heaven, we understand that your opinion is correct, my opinion is correct, and we don't need one to be wrong for the other to be right. And thus there's no animosity. Those arguments endure. Comes along commentaries and they ask a question. What are you talking about? What does it mean endure? The law is like the house of Hillel. Not only is the law like the house of Hillel, but in the Talmud itself it says these words. The opinion of Shammai, when it differs with the opinion of the house of Hillel, is not a teaching and not a law. The Talmud is telling you, don't play games. It is absolute that the ruling is like Hillel. Let me tell you a side note, that right in the beginning of the Talmud, in Tractate Brachot, right in the beginning, Rav Tarfon tells a story, how even though Hillel says this is okay, but I wanted to even cover the opinion of Shammai, and I actually was in danger of being killed by a group of bandits. A whole story with how he said the Shema. You know what they answered him? You deserved to have been killed because you messed with our legal system. If we say that the law is like the house of Hillel, don't be an ibechuchem. As my grandmother, blessed memory, would say, "Sei nicht frömmer wie der Pope." Translated, don't be more observant than the Pope. The Talmud gave you a ruling. It's enough. So I don't understand. If this is how far we go, that we negate Shammai completely in the face of Hillel, did it really endure? It's a very poetic thing. Oh, the disputes for the sakes of heaven will always endure. They didn't endure. Hillel is established and Shammai is wiped away. So how did Shammai's opinion endure? So one of the answers that they give is, it's based on that words I told you before from the Talmud and Eruvin. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. These words and these words are both the words of the living God. Let's get a little mystical here. That's what we do in this platform. What happens is that the menorah has 7 branches. It's one stem, it goes into 7 branches. What that means to us is that the souls all come from one God, but manifest itself in different emotion emanations. Hillel's soul came from the first branch known as chesed, kindness. Thus, his opinion is consistently lenient. Shammai's soul came from the second branch, which is strictness, justice. And thus his opinions are always consistently stringent. So in the spiritual level, both of these opinions are true. However, in the physical world, because our present state of being and capacity cannot uphold to the perfect strictness of justice, thus our sages said we're going to rule like Hillel. Because in today's state of being, on the spiritual darkness and the great forces of temptation that exist, we're saying the rule is going to be like Hillel. And that's how they explain that on a spiritual level, these and these endure. In the menorah, we lit all the candles. We didn't just light one branch. Oh, the law's like Hillel, we're only going to light one candle of the menorah, one branch of the menorah. No, we lit all of them because they all illuminate. On a spiritual level, when we talk about the Torah manifesting itself in the 7 branches, they're all holy flames of light in the holy temple of God. Physically, it manifests itself in the capacity that we can endure, and that is Hillel kindness. However, while this is an accepted opinion in many teachings, the Rebbe pushes the buck. The Rebbe says when we talk about in the Mishnah that it endures, are we talking spiritually or are we talking physically? The Mishnah is not Kabbalah. The Mishnah is not telling me that on a spiritual level, in the emanation of strictness, there Shammai endured. The Mishnah is talking to us physical people. Where did the words of Shammai endure? Physically. Thus, we have the teaching of the great Rabbi Isaac Luria, known as the Ari HaKadosh Darizal. And he says that you should know, when Mashiach comes, we're going to change the ruling. When Mashiach comes, we're going to follow the opinion of Shammai and not the opinion of Hillel. My friends, practically speaking, that means that when Mashiach comes, on the first day of Hanukkah, you're going to light 8 candles, not 1. Because Shammai says you go from 8, less and less and less. That's how real this is. Now, one thing we need to know. Mashiach is not going to change the Torah. The Torah is the Torah. Was, is, and always will be. Thus, rules cannot change. So the legal reason for this is that there's a ruling. Maimonides quotes it. A later courthouse, which is superior in stature and in number, can overrule the ruling of a previous courthouse, which was lower in stature and in number. Thus, legally speaking, what that Rizal is saying is not a problem. Because the courthouse of Mashiach is going to be greater in stature and in number than the courthouse of the Talmud in the time of Hillel and Shammai. Mystically speaking, what's going on here? Very simple. You remember I snuck into you before the mystical reason. We follow the ruling of Hillel because the state of being, i.e. the state of capacity of the present world as we know it, cannot live up to the higher standards of strictness and justice. Thus the sages, for the sake of Jewish survival, universe survival, which depends upon us doing mitzvot right, they said the ruling is going to be like Hillel. Because today, we are dependent upon the kindness and compassion of God. When Mashiach comes, we're not going to have no more Yetzer Hara. That's going to be the first step over here. No more jealousy. No more lust and fame and power-driven people. Thus, we're going to be able to live up to the higher standards of justice. We're going to finally get beyond the bondage of self. We'll be able to be centered on what can I do for others and what can I do for God. Thus then, we'll be able to embrace the teachings of Shammai. Now that you understand that the ruling of the Talmud depends upon the present capacity of the human being, now we'll be able to go back on why the Talmud says that why the Talmud says that the reason for our doing only grace after meal biblically versus the Zohar saying, no, you can do all the blessings biblically. Obviously, the sages are telling us that our present capacity of gratitude is only after you eat a good meal. Before you eat a good meal, you don't have the power to truly express gratitude to God. The Zohar is saying, no, every human being is and will be capable of living up to the highest standards of gratitude, where anything we ever do, from a full meal to a snack to a quick smell of a fragrance, all of it, we will have the power to truly express gratitude. You understand what we're seeing here? Once we understand the difference in Hillel and Shammai, why today we have to lean upon Hillel, while when Mashiach comes we'll be able to stand up with Shammai, we'll understand now why the Talmud says only lean upon that extrapolation of the word. Once you've eaten and you're satisfied, then you can have gratitude. While the Zohar says no. No, we can go far greater than that. We can experience true gratitude even before we eat, and even if it's only going to be a snack bar. But to understand that, we need to go to the next introduction. What is the next introduction? The prerequisite of gratitude. Okay, flight attendants, please tighten your seatbelts. We get mystical. First of all, why do you need a prerequisite to gratitude? Really, 2 words that never cost anyone anything. Thank you. I mean, do it from a business perspective. You say thank you, they'll be there for you next time. So let's just understand something. What is gratitude the way you and I understand it? Is it procreative or is it reactionary? When do I tell you thank you? By the way, when I tell you thank you when I'm making a solicitation, I'm manipulating you. I'd like to ask you to please consider a fine gift towards the calendar. Thank you. What did I just do with the thank you? I'm manipulating you. That's not real. Real thank you is when I appreciate something you have done in the past, I tell you thank you. Right? Is that what the Zohar said? What did the Zohar define that word thank you? It defined it as these words. Baruch. This is the secret of the source of all. To pour it, to draw it, and with it to illuminate all candles. We'll soon see that candles are you and me. We're all the candles to God. We are the vessels through which God illuminates, right? The candle of God is the soul of man. So now we understand that according to the Zohar, thank you is not a reaction to a past experience. Rather, according to the Zohar, gratitude, i.e. making a blessing, is procreating the present and the future by bringing unprecedented divinity into my life. Pouring, drawing, and illuminating. Thus, we now understand why there's a prerequisite. If it's just being grateful for the past, the prerequisite to my saying thank you is not me, it's you. You did something. That's the prerequisite, to which I'm now going to say thank you. Which, if you watch Mona, you then know you have to sing the "You're Welcome" song, right? Moana, what's the name of that movie? Whatever. So, the Zohar is not saying that it's a reaction to the past of what you did for me. The Zohar is saying that it's a proactive thing, which I am going to do to bring unprecedented spirituality into my life in the now. To do that, you need a prerequisite. So now let's get into the prerequisite. To understand the prerequisite to really experiencing spiritual gratitude from the inside out, one that is proactive and not reactive, one that creates the present and not responds to the past, we need to have the power of the sparks of Tohu. Why? So let's first do a little bit of understanding. According to the great teachings, specifically of the Arizal, Rabbi Zigluria again, and the Luria Kabbalah, when the sages teach us in the homiletic teachings that before God created this world, He created worlds and destroyed them, he says it doesn't mean that God created the worlds and destroyed them. God doesn't need to work things out. Oops, send out a patch. Rather, in the process of evolution, from the infinite light to the finite universe, the finite creature, there had to have been a world which shattered, i.e. built and destroyed. And thus he introduces to us the amazing spiritual world of Tohu. Tohu means chaos. Why was this world called chaos? Very simple. Because the infinite lights had no respect for the finite capacity of its vessels. And this created chaos to the point where the vessels were not able any further to endure the infinite light, and they shattered. And when they shattered, they fell into our world, which is called Olam HaTikun, the world of orderliness. So now we know why that world is called chaos. Infinite lights, huge, but didn't respect the limitations of its vessels, and it shattered. Chaos leads to chaos. Why is this world called orderliness? Because in this world, there's been such deep contractions and constraints and weakening of the infinite light. There's been thickening and coarseness added on to the vessels. Thus, these vessels can now endure their light. Okay? However, there's a caveat to the world of orderliness. What is the caveat? That by weakening the light and thickening the vessels, the ego arrogance of the vessels to cover the light, what did you end up with? A world in which there's a very weak revelation, spirituality. We don't have the infinite power of passion and pleasure. Because by definition, all these spiritual experiences have been weakened. Not only have they been weakened, they've been covered. That's why you have the Olam HaTikun the way we know it. But in this Olam HaTikun, we don't have natural, powerful experience of spirituality. You've got to go into meditation. You've got to stop being, and all the wonderful things they teach you. To be an observer of self from the outside, because from the inside, you will never be able to experience that burst of infinite passion, pleasure, spirituality, and any of that. Now let's go back to the fallen sparks. We have in this world fallen sparks of Tohu. What are those fallen sparks of Tohu? Little pieces of this infinite spirituality, passion, revelation, pleasure. So they do exist. But here's the rule. When the greater fall, they fall deep and low. Thus, on a simple practical perspective, when you are born and you just grow up in just daily life, where do you come across passion, pleasure, unbelievable experiences? It's usually in the physical. Thus, we have a little problem here. While these fallen sparks, in their truest essence, the only passion and pleasure and power, spirituality they have, is godly, but once they fell into the lower physical manifestations, they're now encaged in temptation. So here we have a beautiful infinite power, an infinite spark of tohu, but it's stuck in a casing of temptation. Now, if I may, I want you to picture the great superhero called Superman. Because if you picture what Superman is, you will know exactly what these super sparks of tohu are. What is Superman? According to the story that these two Yiddish high school people created. It's interesting, I just learned today that Superman was created by two Jewish boys. And what happens? This is a human being, whatever you want to call him, a being of a world called Krypton, who fell into this world because he comes from a different, far transcending elevation. He is not held down by the heaviness of our gravity, and thus, right? Higher than the tallest building, fire, quicker than that's what we talk about. That's exactly what the sparks of tohu are. They've fallen here from a different world, a different reality, and thus they very simply defy the heaviness of our spiritual gratitude, of our spiritual gravity. Please picture that, because that will really explain to you what is the sparks of tohu, and it will also give us another beautiful experience. It will explain to us what happens when we digest, when we connect and digest with these sparks of tohu. We've connected to that super power, super spiritual power, which then we can defy the heavy gravity of the entire world of tikkun. Thus we have the beautiful experience of the infinite light of tohu in the environment of tikkun. So we have the goodness of the orderliness. We don't have to go chaotic because we're having spiritual transcendence. And on the other hand, we're not stuck in the heaviness of orderliness. We can experience from the inside out the greatness of the infinite light of tohu. Okay? However, there's a problem here. There's a beautiful saying. The one thing that a king has to conquer before he can rule others is what? He has to rule over himself. If you can't rule over yourself, you cannot be a king. History has suffered tremendously from kings that only practice ruling others without ruling over themselves. Let me give you again a practical picture in your head. The Arabian stallion is an amazing, beautiful beast. However, before you break its spirit, it is chaotic and off limits to you. Only once you break the spirit of the Arabian stallion, and then you can saddle it, and then you can harness all that unbelievable energy into productive experiences of growth, of accomplishments. Now you understand what we're talking about. Those sparks that fell into the depths of wealth, fame, beauty, power, unless you can break the ego spirit of these stallions, unless you can free these tohu sparks of the casing of absolute ego, arrogance, it will not be a good experience. However, if you can face the temptation of the casings of the sparks of tohu, then you can experience what it means to safely and productively and amazingly take a ride on the back of the Arabian stallion. What does that mean to us? Practically speaking, we're learning something here. But to understand what we're learning here, we're going to have to go to the next concept. What does it mean to love God with all your might? First thing I want to share with you is that we already understand the coded Jewish law's opinion. To be able to experience gratitude, you have to first be able to break the casing of temptation, i.e., you're going to have to be able to eat the meat and drink the wine, which has within it those super sparks of tohu, but you're going to have to first overcome the ego spirit so that you're not focused on the pleasures that are riding on your taste buds and the gluttony that is going on from your ego sense of scarcity. More, more, more. If you don't have that, you're not capable of truly experiencing what it means to have gratitude. Because if gratitude, according to the Zohar, means I'm not just saying thank you, but what I'm really doing is I'm drawing into my tikkun world of coarseness, weakened spirituality. If I'm drawing into this dimension, the infinite, let's quote it again, the secret of the source of all. That's what the Zohar said. That's what we're doing with gratitude. That's what we're doing by having a blessing. By really telling God from the inside out, thank you. You cannot do that before the king cannot rule others until it first rules himself. Unless I can eat like a mensch, where the food becomes part of me instead of me becoming part of the food, we're not empowered to be able to truly experience the ultimate powers and secret of bringing the source of all into me, connecting with the power. Thus, they say, only after you successfully eat a meal like a mensch, only after that are you capable of truly saying grace after meal. You can't do it without it. So we already had enough introductions to understand the code of Jewish law's opinion. What does the Zohar say? To understand what the Zohar says, you have to ask yourself a simple question. What would it be like to be able to break free from the bondage of self? To be able to truly experience on a consistent and permanent level the transparency of the casing of temptation, ego, spirit of self. To be able to become transparent enough to absorb the spirituality of Tohu. What happens if I don't just do it after I eat and I focus on why I'm eating? I don't live to eat, I eat to live. And if I eat to live, there's always someone less fortunate than me sharing my food with me. If I live to eat, get your hands off of that. That's what the Talmud says. But the Zohar is bringing us a phenomena. What if we can walk and talk like this all day? And not just when we sit down to eat and say, okay, I'm not going to enjoy this just by myself. You guys ever see that movie scene? These two people are sitting in a beautiful restaurant, and there's like this poor kid looking in the window. And so, all right, send them out something. That's what the Talmud's saying. That's the best we can do. The Zohar is saying no. We can wake up with that attitude. And we can work that attitude. And if we can work that attitude, then we're always in touch with the powers, the deep secret and powers of gratitude. To draw down the infinite powers of Krypton, this holy super sparks of Tohu, can be my spiritual passion reality all day long. Then I'm capable of making blessings all day long. Before I eat, after I eat, before I enjoy something, after. So to understand the Zohar's seemingly fantasy of us human beings to be able to do this, we need to talk about love. In the commandment of love God your God, we have 3 parts. With all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Now let's talk about this. with all your heart and with all your soul. How do you love God? How do you love God with all your heart and with all your soul? So I'm going to give you come, my friend. Don't stand over there. Come. You have the most expensive seat in the house. What is this definition? It doesn't get cheaper. Come. What is the definition of loving God with all your heart and with all your soul? Simply speaking, you cannot have gratitude when you're suffering from self-centeredness. It's just a paradox. It's a dichotomy. It's antithetical. So what do? So someone tells you, you are really self-centered. Really? Okay. Next thing, we're going to create a board meeting of self. All members of self, please approach the bench. We're going to have a board meeting. And you sit down, and with your mind, you really understand and you really embrace how self-centeredness is ruining my relationships. It's ruining my spirituality. It's ruining my success in business. I can't get along with anyone because I'm always thinking me. And what can you do for me today? It's ruining everything. So this board meeting of self can understand this is not good. And then you decide this has got to change. And how do we change it? Very simply. Somewhere, somehow, we're going to have to remove the center of my universe, which until now was me, capital M. As a great chassid once said, English is the only language where I is capitalized and the Y for you is small. That's how we see it. America exists for my pursuit of happiness. And thus, we have a board meeting and we realize this can't go on. I've got to take that capital I, remove it from the center of my universe, and replace it with what? My higher power, God. When I replace the center of my universe, I transfer from I to you, capital Y. What then happens? I transfer my love. I love the center of my universe. And now the center of my universe is God. And thus, the members of this board meeting of self, i.e., mind, soul, and heart, can embrace that. And thus to be able to achieve love God with all your heart and with all your soul is done through the process of self. That's possible. What's impossible is to reach the level of love God with all your might through a board meeting of self. Because no matter how altruistic all the members of self is, it is by definition self. And thus self can never truly negate itself. And thus, my love for God is only when it fits into myself. Now, let me explain to you what this means. We've all gone on a diet one day in our lives. Wow, that was actually an interesting pun. We've gone on a diet one day of our lives. But okay, we'll leave that for there. Now, what happens? Why would I go on a diet? I happen to love chocolate. The answer is not because I'm altruistic. I'm trading one definition of self for another definition of self. Because looking good and feeling healthy is more. I now understand that I'm no more a teenager and thus invincible. I now understand it's time to start worrying about that cholesterol and sugar, and we're going to go on a diet. So it wasn't a total negation of self. It was a higher, more beautiful understanding of self. Thus, when the self has a board meeting to decide that we cannot go on being self-centered, it's not negating self. It's trying to appreciate a more mature definition of self. But if it's only a definition of self, you will never get beyond love God with all your mind, with all your heart, all your soul. It's limited, it's finite. The love and the transformation of self and center of my universe is contingent upon the finite capacity of self. How altruistic can the self be while it's self? And for the humans, that's pretty big. We're not animals. We have a frontal lobe. We don't just have a limbic system and a survival system. But it's only love God with all your heart and with all your soul, not beyond that. To love God with all your might takes a total smashing of self. You cannot reach beyond self through self, and thus the only way to go beyond loving God with all your heart and with all your soul is by completely and absolutely removing any iota or fragrance of self from the center of my universe. It is absolute surrender to my higher power. You are the center of my universe, not because the board meeting voted on you. Rather, I am the outer shell of your universe because you created me and I have not created you. The self from self could never get there. Thus, there is the smashing of self, which is the only way that opens me up to love God beyond my heart's capacity, beyond my mind's capacity, and to completely embrace to love God with all my might. Thus, the Zohar says, we are capable of doing this. We are capable of loving God beyond the greatest refinement of self. We can actually experience a total freedom of the bondage of self, where it's not self promotes higher power for its survival, rather it's total surrender. When you're capable of doing that, when you're capable of loving God with all your might, not just because He fits into your system, then you're capable of having the proactive powers of gratitude and blessing. Thus, before I even eat the spark of tohu, I'm already capable of bringing gratitude in my life for even giving me this food. Then I eat the food like a mensch, where the food becomes part of me and not where I become part of the food. And once we do that, we now take blessings to a whole new level. Grace after meal. That's where the Zohar is coming from. In closing, people. You know why we don't have gratitude? Have you ever spoken to a pessimist / ungrateful person? And I'm not talking about someone evil out there, because I don't consider myself evil and I struggle with this. Do you know what the answer of any ungrateful person is? Of course I would be grateful if I had what to be grateful about. What is that person saying? That person is saying that whatever God thinks He's doing for me does not register in the capacity of my egocentric mind and heart as being something I should truly be grateful for. But the minute God will be able to give me something that my self will appreciate, oh, now we're talking, God, a little bit of money, a lot of bit of money, happiness, cruises. I walk down the street, what does Tevye say in his song, If I Were a Rich Man? Oh, they ask me, Reb Tevye. Okay, now I can be grateful. But as Tevye the milkman, with 3 daughters to marry off, what's there to be grateful about? So what stops us from being grateful is that we're willing to give up within self as much as we can give up. And as long as God can continue or begin, for God's sakes, to do for me something that I can appreciate from my egocentric point of view, that was nice of you, God. Then I can have gratitude. Post-eating, never before eating. Do for me, God, and I'll tell you thank you. It doesn't work that way. Unless we're able to break free, freedom from the bondage of self, and to understand that everything God does for me, when He does it for me, how He does it for me, even if I said, ouch, would God ever do for me something that wasn't for my goodness? I mean, ultimately speaking, if God hurts me, who's He hurting? I'm a piece of Him, no? If I can get out of self and embrace that with all your might, because you are the center of my universe, and all I have to say to you is thank you for allowing me to exist in a universe of which you are the center, then we're able to have gratitude. Thank you, people.